Harvard Business Reviews report that an estimated 75% of women have experienced imposter syndrome at some stage in their career, as opposed to 40% in men. And this is largely attributed to gender stereotypes and the societal expectation that have been placed on women. Now, have you experienced imposter syndrome? Well, maybe not. Today, we'll be tackling the subject. Welcome to our very first Coffee Counsel with Lady Jaz. You can call it C&C with Lady Jaz, right? Today we'll be looking at the topic, imposter syndrome. Is it a psychological phenomenon, or is it just some buzzword that's been flying all over social media or flying all over, just to keep the conversation going? We'll also be looking at what the Bible actually says about imposter syndrome. Does the Bible say anything? Is the Bible silent on imposter syndrome? Is it mentioned somewhere? What are we supposed to do as Christians when we're faced with imposter syndrome? But before we go further, let's do some housekeeping. I'm going to remind you to like, to comment, and obviously to share this video with your friends and family. And please subscribe to the channel and do the right thing by clicking on that notification button. I want you to get all the other videos. So come with me along this journey. First things first, let's look at the definition of imposter syndrome. What is it? I mean, we hear it all the time. We hear the word flying all around. But what is it? Today, I actually took the liberty of looking at Google and at Meta, and they gave me two very distinctive definitions, which I'll read to you. The first says, imposter syndrome is a psychological phenomenon where individuals doubt their accomplishment, they feel like frauds, and believe they don't deserve the success despite external evidence of their competence. They fear being imposters. And the other definition gave me the persistent inability to believe that one's success is deserved or has been legitimately achieved as a result of their own effort or their skills. Well, as soon as I read that, I knew that I felt squarely within the definition at some stage of my life. I have many stories to share when it comes to the subject of imposter syndrome, from my personal experience and my personal journey, especially in my career, in my early career. But there's one that's, that stands out very particular to an incident that happened earlier on in my career. I remember my principal at the time, my late principal at the time, informed me, actually she didn't ask me, she informed me that I'd be attending court the next morning to represent a client, one of our major clients actually, to move a default judgment. Now, for seasoned lawyers, this is probably one of the easiest applications to move in any court. It's all on paper. All you have to do is take the application and go before a magistrate or a judge and ask them to grant you the default judgment. But I was crippled by fear. The thought of having to go stand before the magistrate court crippled me. I couldn't believe that my principal was sending me out to go to court to represent one of our major clients in a default judgment. Now, what should have been a moment of thrill, a moment of excitement, actually turned into a moment of self-doubt, a moment that exposed an unexpected lack of self-confidence. I didn't realize that I was at that stage. For me, it was actually the fear of failing, the fear of failing my clients, because I had the weight of the firm, I had the weight of the client, and I didn't want to let them down, right? So it all came down to that fear. I think that's where the problem was. The fear of failure, the fear of not living up to what I was capable of of doing, basically. And I'm going to actually throw back the question to you. Have you ever felt a fear that holds you back from doing what you're supposed to do? A fear of failing that hinders you from getting into what you're supposed to get into? Has self-doubt ever held you back to the point where you're not even living in your purpose? Has fear or self-doubt robbed you of a moment that is supposed to be transformative in your career, in your life? And on that day, I doubted. I doubted the very thing that I believed that God had put in me. I doubted my capability. I doubted my abilities. I actually doubted my own voice. I doubted that my voice would project loud enough in that courtroom. And evidently enough, the magistrate actually asked me to speak louder, which I did, and the rest is history because everything went well. Thank God. I'll say this. Your internal state has the capability of creating your external reality. I'll say it again. Your internal state has the capacity and capability of creating your external reality. Imposter syndrome is a thief. Imposter syndrome is robbing you of your authenticity. Imposter syndrome is robbing you of your confidence. Imposter syndrome is robbing you of your voice. And it's robbing you and distorting your true identity. How often do you brush off compliments when the world is cheering you on? How often do you downplay all the good that you've done where the world is looking up to you? We often doubt the purpose to which God is calling us to because of imposter syndrome. So now, let's look at what the Bible tells us about imposter syndrome. The Bible does not specifically mention imposter syndrome. However, the Bible does provide or give us a lot of references and passages that helps us overcome imposter syndrome. The most important thing to remember in all of this is that the grace of God is sufficient. I looked at the life of Paul and I delved deep into scriptures to try and understand the transformation that Paul experienced. Paul started off as a self-doubting apostle, a self-doubting man, where he describes himself as the least of the inferior of the apostles. And then we later see his transformation where he's a confident and influential apostle. I believe that Paul had moments in his own life where he felt unworthy to bring the good news to the Gentiles because of his past. For Paul, it may have been his past. He was persecuting the church. He was persecuting the Gentiles. For me, it was a moment in a courtroom, in a magistrate court, where I feared, I had doubts. I was intimidated. But for you, what are the challenges and obstacles that you're facing today? Are you struggling to find your confidence as a career woman or as a career-driven mother? Are you struggling or feeling challenged to find a balance in your personal relationship, perhaps with your spouse, with a partner? Are you maybe in a season where you are afraid to level up to where God is calling you or to step up in your career? The question is actually this: how do we silence the internal doubting voices to find our external voices in this season? The Bible in Acts 18, verse 19, actually, let me read that. In Acts 18, verse 19, it says, "One night the Lord spoke to Paul in a vision. Don't be afraid. Keep on speaking. Do not be silent." And there precisely we find our breakthrough. This passage shows us three things, and I'll share these three things. The first is, don't be afraid. Get rid of that fear. The second is, don't stop. And the third, open your mouth and speak. And for context, if we go back to Acts 18, we find Paul at a place where he was in the synagogue and he was trying to preach or bring about the good news and tell the people, the Jews and the Greeks, his own people, that Jesus is the Messiah. and they became very abusive. The Bible even says that they insulted him until he felt he had to leave. And when he left, he went to the Gentiles that he had persecuted earlier. And I believe that he went to a place where God had called him. He was in alignment to where God had intended him to be. You know, in that season, he could have said to himself, well, I'm not good enough to speak to the Gentiles. I'm not able to speak. I'm not worthy enough to present myself before the Gentiles. But he didn't stop. He got rid of that fear. He went over that fear and he placed himself where the Lord was calling him. And this is also a message for us to rid ourselves of fear. God is telling us to get rid of that fear. Do not be afraid. He's telling us to get out of our fear, to rise up about our fear, to get over that fear. Change the way you see yourself. Don't stop. What you have within you is enough. You're carrying a dream. You're carrying a promise. You need to begin moving in the direction of that promise. Could you imagine if Paul had not moved and remained in Jerusalem and never left Jerusalem? He wouldn't have heard the voice of God, nor would he have met Jesus on the road to Damascus. But because he had left where he was, he stood in his purpose. God met him there. Could it be that you haven't heard from God because you have not placed yourself in the direction of where God is taking you? Could it be that God's voice is not fully audible in your life because you're not where He wants you to be? You're not walking, you have not begun to walk in the obedience of where He's called you to? Could it be that God has not yet released the power that you carry in you because you're still switched off? God is waiting for something from you. God is asking something from you. And what He's asking is the sacrifice. How will God tell you to speak if you've not even opened up your mouth? If you've never said anything, if you've never uttered anything? God has definitely provided the fire. He's definitely provided the dream. He's definitely provided the promise. He's given it to you. It's in you. He's now waiting on your sacrifice. And your sacrifice is you opening up your mouth. Your sacrifice is you not remaining silent. Your sacrifice is you moving. Paul offered his sacrifice by not remaining silent, and today we know him as a prominent apostle. He formed the early church. He instilled leadership in the early church. He trained up the early church. He did not remain silent. Silence is not an option when you want to make an everlasting impact. If you want to see a change in your home, you want to see a change in your family, you want to see a change in your atmosphere, you cannot remain silent. You must keep going. You must write that business plan. You must open up your mouth. You must be on the move. You must keep doing your best. God will meet you at your point of service. Yes, I know it's not easy. It's never easy. I personally have missed many opportunities. I almost missed this opportunity when God called me and tasked me to do this, to talk, to open up my voice. I had many excuses. I had excuses of time. I don't have the time. I'm not a YouTuber. I'm not a preacher. I'm not a speaker. I don't know how to do it. But I had to do it. I had to step into alignment with what God was doing. And my prayer for you, as you're feeling the fear, as you're going through the doubt, as you're feeling voiceless, may you be reminded of the journey of Paul. May you be reminded of the man who started with lots of self-doubt, with lots of questions, questioning whether he was able to carry through the mission that the Lord had placed on him, to become this transformed man that we know today as an influential apostle, an apostle who built up our Christian community, who built up Christian churches. When God gives you that dream, when God gives you that platform, when He gives you that career, when He gives you that family, bring Him the sacrifice. And the sacrifice is your family, it's your life, your wealth, your time. That is what God is calling you to. Bring Him that sacrifice. I believe that God has spoken to someone through the CNC, and the words of wisdom for today, we found it at Acts 18, verse 19. It says, do not be afraid. Keep on speaking. Do not be silent. Remember, you have a voice. You actually have it all within you. God is asking you to reframe your thinking. See the way God sees you. And before I go, I'd like to leave you with 2 biblical declarations that you can meditate on. The first will be, I will not be afraid, for God has given me a voice to proclaim his truth. And the second is, my voice is empowered by the Holy Spirit and I will use it to glorify God. Meditate on these two statements, and until we meet again, God bless you, and I cannot wait to see you again at the next CNC with Lady Jaz.
Round and round, these seasons I've been facing, but this year, you're blessed.